864,999 people. That's not a typo. That's how many New Yorkers are currently on cash assistance, the highest number this city has seen in 30 years. Not during a recession, not during a pandemic lockdown. Right now. And the mayor currently running this city didn't build this number. He inherited it, and he's been handed the exact same playbook that produced it. Here's the part that should bother you. Whoever's name is on the door, the machine keeps running exactly as designed. If your gut reaction to that number was something is wrong here, you're not being cold. You're not being heartless. You're pattern matching correctly. There's a name for what you're noticing, and it's not new. A French economist described it 175 years ago, and everything happening in New York City right now, across mayors, across parties, across reforms, is a textbook case study of exactly what he warned about. By the end of this video, you're going to have 3 numbers, 3 receipts, and once you see how they connect, you won't be able to unsee it, because this isn't a New York problem, and it isn't a Mamdani problem. It's the same pattern every compassion system produces when nobody's allowed to ask where the money actually goes. The name you need is Frederick Bastiat. The concept is what is seen and what is not seen. Stick with me, because once I show you what's unseen in this story, the record spending equals record compassion narrative falls apart in about 90 seconds. Let's get into the first number. Let's slow down on that first number, because the context is where it gets damning. New York City's cash assistance caseload just hit its highest point in 3 decades. Not since the mid-90s, before welfare reform, before workfare requirements, before an entire generation of policy was built specifically to bring that number down, has the city seen this many people on the rolls at once. So ask the obvious question, what changed? Was there a new economic collapse nobody told you about? A hidden recession? No. What changed is policy. The city expanded eligibility, loosened work requirements, and poured more money into cash assistance than at almost any point in its history, all under the banner of compassion. And the caseload didn't shrink in response. It grew. It hit a 30-year high. If your instinct is more spending should mean less need over time, not more people trapped in the system, that instinct is exactly right, and it's exactly what Frederick Bastiat described in 1850 in an essay called That Which Is Seen and That Which Is Not Seen. Here's the mechanism, translated for you. Every time a government program hands out money, there's the part everyone can see, the check, the benefit, the family that got help this month. Politicians photograph that part. Reporters write about that part. That's the scene. What's not seen is everything that money didn't become instead. The small business that didn't open because its owner got taxed to fund the program. The job that never got created. The person who stayed 1 more year on assistance instead of taking a lower-paying entry job because the math of losing benefits made working a pay cut. None of that shows up in a press release. None of it gets a photo op. But it's just as real, arguably more real, because it's structural, not a one-time event. That's the trick. A record caseload gets sold to you as evidence of a growing safety net. Bastiat would tell you it's evidence of something else entirely. An incentive structure that's succeeding at keeping people exactly where they are while calling a help. This is not a New York invention. It's not even a modern one. It's the oldest pattern in the compassion industry playbook. Measure success by dollars spent and people enrolled, never by people who no longer need it. By that metric, the program is a disaster. By the metric the city actually uses, enrollment, spending, reach, it's a triumph. You already suspected the numbers were being spun. Now you know exactly which numbers, and exactly which economist called it a century and 3/4 before Mamdani's name ever showed up on a ballot. And we're just getting started, because the caseload number is the least damning of the 3. Here's number 2, and this is the one that turns a bad headline into a smoking gun. In the last 5 years, New York City's budget for cash assistance jumped by 72.6%, from $1.57 billion in fiscal 2022 to $2.71 billion for the fiscal year that just began. That's not inflation. That's not cost of living went up, so benefits went up proportionally. That's the actual dollar outlay to run the program more than doubling in real terms in half a decade, spanning 2 different administrations, 2 different mayors, two different sets of promises. Now put the two numbers next to each other. Spending up 72.6%. Caseload at a 30-year high. If this were any other kind of program, a business, a school district, a private charity, and you doubled the budget while the problem it exists to solve got worse, you would call that a failure. You'd ask for new management. You wouldn't call it success. But in the compassion economy, the math gets inverted. The bigger the check, the more virtuous the intent looks, regardless of what the check actually produced, regardless of who's signing it. This is where Thomas Sowell picks up where Bastiat left off. Sowell spent decades studying exactly this pattern, what critics have come to call the poverty industry. Not charity, industry. Because once a system exists to administer poverty, that system has its own payroll, its own budget requests, its own incentive to keep the caseload numbers exactly where they are or growing. A caseworker doesn't get promoted for shrinking their caseload to zero. An agency doesn't get a bigger budget next year by announcing it's solved the problem. Sowell's point, translated to your life, the people managing the program are not incentivized by the same outcome you are. You want people to need the program less over time. The apparatus running the program is funded, staffed, and politically rewarded by people needing it more. That's not a conspiracy. Nobody's twirling a mustache in a back room. It's just what happens when you build an incentive structure and then act surprised when people and institutions respond to the incentives you built. Bastiat told you what's unseen. Sowell told you why the unseen part never gets fixed, because fixing it would mean someone's budget gets smaller and nobody in that position volunteers for that, no matter which administration they work for. 72.6% more money. The same 3-decade record caseload. It was supposed to shrink. That's not compassion working. That's a machine running exactly as engineered, and it doesn't care who's currently at the controls. And there's one more number, the one that proves this isn't just a New York story. Here's the third number, and this is the one that takes the argument national. In April of 2026, the Government Accountability Office, Congress's own watchdog, not some partisan think tank, reported that federal agencies made an estimated $186 billion in improper payments in fiscal year 2025 alone. 82% of that, roughly $153 billion, was overpayments, money sent out that shouldn't have gone out or went out in the wrong amount. And where does most of it concentrate? Medicare, Medicaid, the Earned Income Tax Credit, SNAP, the exact same category of program we've been talking about this entire video, just scaled up from one city to an entire country. This is the moment where the NYC story stops being a New York story. Because if this were unique to one city, one mayor, one administration, you could write it off as local mismanagement. But you just watched the same pattern repeat at the federal level, across dozens of programs, across administrations of both parties, for over 20 years running. Cumulative improper payments since 2003 are estimated at roughly $3 trillion. $3 trillion. That's not a policy failure. A failure is something that happens once and gets corrected. This is a feature. This is what Bastiat's unseen costs look like when you zoom out from one city to an entire federal government. Money moving through a system so large that nobody's incentivized to ask where it actually lands, as long as the caseload numbers keep climbing and the budget requests keep getting approved. So here's where the three numbers leave you. 865,000 people, a 30-year record. 72.6% more spending to manage it. And the caseload didn't shrink, it grew. And $186 billion a year in federal payment errors, a pattern the government's own watchdog says has persisted for 2 decades under both parties. 3 numbers, 1 mechanism. Bastiat named it in 1850. Sowell explained why nobody fixes it. And the data from this year proves they were both right. Not about New York specifically, but about what happens every single time you build a system that gets rewarded for growing, not for solving. That's not compassion. That's an incentive structure wearing compassion as a costume. So what do you actually do with 3 numbers like these? You don't need to hate anyone to see this clearly. Not the mayor, not the caseworkers, not the 865,000 people just trying to get through the month. The point was never that individuals are villains. The point is that when you build a system where growth is rewarded and shrinkage is punished, the system grows, regardless of who's running it, regardless of how good their intentions are on day one. That's not cynicism. That's just taking incentives seriously enough to look at where they actually lead. Bastiat wasn't writing about New York in 1850. He was describing a pattern in human institutions that shows up again and again in every country, under every flag, whenever seen generosity gets separated from its unseen cost. The uncomfortable part isn't that this happened in one city. It's that it will keep happening anywhere the incentive stays the same, until someone's willing to measure success by people who leave the system, not by how many are added to it. If this connected some dots for you, that's exactly what this channel exists to do. So hit like, and if you actually disagree with something here, say in the comments. I'd rather argue with you than have you scroll past agreeing silently. And subscribe if you haven't, because next week we're doing this same exercise on a policy you've probably defended without ever checking the unseen side of it. Now here's a question for the comments. The kind smiley eyes crowd actually answers instead of ignoring. If the goal was really to shrink dependency, what number would you need to see go down before you believe the system was working? If you want the video that set up everything Bastiat's argument builds on, it's right there on your screen now.